Happy Halloween, folks! Now, I'm sure that somewhere in the back of your mind, you might remember this Cartoon Network special that would air around this time of year. Yes, this is actually something we would sit down and watch. Scary Godmother Halloween Spooktacular was a Canadian 3D animation film released back in 2003. Inspired by Jill Thompson's children's book series and its popularity, the literature was bound to see a movie adaptation. Despite how horrible the movie looked, even for its time, it was still critically acclaimed and praised for its solid writing and storytelling. The ratings were so high, in fact, that the movie even won the Leo Awards for Program of the Year back in 2003, quickly getting picked up by Cartoon Network to premiere every Halloween until suddenly, that was no longer the case. It's not exactly clear when or why they stopped airing the special, besides some baseless speculation online. But I think this is just another case of nothing worth having lasting forever. I personally just unfogged the nebulous thought of this film after rewatching it for the first time in what seemed like a lifetime ago. And it wasn't so bad. And I understand that's not a lot of money when we're talking about an animated film. However, if Finding Nemo came out in the same year, I'm sure you could have met at least half the expectations when it came down to visual quality. The funny thing is, this is exactly what Mainframe Entertainment, the company responsible for this project, wanted to avoid. In a 2001 interview, Dan Didio... Didio? I don't think it's Dan Didio. I don't know how you say it. It's probably on screen right now, but I don't know. Dan Didio sounds pretty funny right now. Mainframe Senior Vice President of Creative Affairs admitted other investors were holding television computer animated productions to the same standard as theatrical films. To avoid these comparisons, the company stylized their animation with productions like Scary Godmother. It was the first production where Mainframe used proprietary software, and this led to more flexibility and tools to experiment, making it easier to achieve a unique visual style that Karen Moltenbray of Computer Graphics World categorized as more reminiscent of The Nightmare Before Christmas than modern 3D animated films. Okay, first off, do not desecrate Tim Burton's work on this. I'd say this film is more reminiscent of my projectile vomit after eating far too many Pop-Tarts. Who am I to speak though? I wasn't even born yet when this was made. Now, I heavily emphasize the word visual when speaking of quality because for a cartoon targeted towards actual children, this movie is beyond great. I never once questioned myself watching the film like I sometimes do when a kids show comes on and I decide to pay attention to it for some reason. There's a huge difference in feeling like you're witnessing a bunch of kids being kids and feeling like you, the viewer, are being treated as such. So for these reasons, I didn't feel awkward or out of place watching this story unfold. Our main character consists of a little girl named Hannah and of course the Scary Godmother herself. That is her actual name, by the way. When Hannah's older cousin Jimmy and his group of friends decide to ditch her inside of a haunted mansion, her cries for help summon a not so wicked witch. In fact, the witch's kindness extends beyond Hannah's initial expectations. The Scary Godmother reassures Hannah that whatever preconceived notion she has about monsters is likely untrue. So to prove her point even further, she invites Hannah over to her annual Halloween party, which will be attended by real monsters. Jimmy and his group of friends return from their search for candy to check up on Hannah, only to find out that she still hasn't left the mansion. That's right, baby, she's out there partying in Hotel Transylvania. This movie shows us the progression of Hannah's character, learning how to not judge a book by its cover. It's not so much the fact that this moral makes the story thrive, but the pacing flows so naturally that you're kind of invested in this world without caring too much about substance. Usually when watching these kind of films, I try to predict the ending based on what I see in the introduction, and if I get it right, then I win. For some reason, I didn't do that this time, and maybe that could attest to how good this movie actually is. When Hannah explains to the monsters who told her all of these lies about them, she calls out her cousin Jimmy. This obviously infuriates them, and they all collectively come up with a plan to get him back, ultimately deciding to give Jimmy and the others a good scare. This is practically all there is to the film. Hannah gets her redemption for being relentlessly bullied by Jimmy and his friends, while also learning that monsters aren't so scary after all. It's a basic story that's definitely been overdone at this point, especially in 2024, but it still works if done right. Like I said though, I was thoroughly entertained, but this movie is definitely not exempt from any criticism. A large portion of the movie was dedicated to showing Jimmy and the gang's POV, basically waiting for Hannah to come out, right? It was spent time having stupid discussions and arguing about stuff like, who's the leader of the group, or can I have some of your candy? I didn't think it was a complete waste of time, as seeing the group go through their insignificant troubles was kind of reminiscent of my younger days, not that I'm like 100 years old, but their interactions together felt real, except for the way that they treated Hannah, like they genuinely turned into demons or something. She was begging and crying for the life of her, and the gang just stood outside laughing their ass off. That would definitely be some Joker shit if he was having a bad day. I also think some some of the jokes here were extremely forced, or at least they came across that way. Like, for instance, one of Jimmy's friends named Katie has a crush on one of the guys. They're both trading candy, and Katie's like, "I'll take this in exchange for 3 kisses." The joke obviously being that she wanted 3 actual kisses instead of the chocolate. I'm pretty sure as soon as they wrote her character to make that joke, a light bulb must have came out of the writer's head or something. Cause like, there's no way that they were into each other before she said that. It was just weird and definitely caught me off guard, but there were a couple of moments like that sprinkled throughout the movie. However, let's just talk about the goat Harry for a second. This werewolf did not give a singular He came right into this party just to eat all the food and piss everyone off. It got so bad to the point where one of the guests, who happened to be a vampire, actually put him to sleep for a majority of the film. Harry was definitely one of my favorite characters, but only because it works in the context of animation. Anyone who acts like Harry IRL is getting the 1-2 for sure. Those are some of my thoughts on Scary Godmother, but it's not over yet because they actually made a sequel. Scary Godmother: Revenge of Jimmy was a follow-up film released back in 2005, 2 years after the original. You'd think they would say, hey, our last film looked kinda shit, but it did really well, maybe we could up the quality a little bit before the deadline. Somehow, I think this one looks even worse. Actually, you might have seen this meme floating around Jimmy online. It's used a lot as a reaction image on Twitter where his ears grow beyond the size of his head. It's just so fucking ugly, man. 1 year later, Jimmy's scared as shit and borderline traumatized from those monsters. His group of friends seem to be alright though. They never even mentioned the event after it happened. When Halloween rolls around again, everyone seems to be pretty excited. Hannah was given a key in the last movie that allows her to visit Scary Godmother whenever she wants, so yeah, they're kinda tight now. As for Jimmy's friends, they try to invite him to go out trick-or-treating again, but Jimmy's fear turns into resentment for the holiday. He comes up with this brilliant plan to crush everyone's Halloween spirit, so then monsters wouldn't have a reason to come out in the first place. By everyone, I also just mean Hannah and his group of friends, because where they live is a literal ghost town. At least in the first movie's opening credits, we get to see more people trick-or-treating around the area, but in this one, oh no, it's like they just didn't even bother to create a sense of environment. I feel like they saw how much profit the first one made, so they just cut back their budget for the second one, just in case it didn't perform as well. Anyways, Jimmy sabotages the group's Halloween plans, and it actually ends up working. He destroys pumpkin patches, throws toilet paper over houses, and does everything within his means to ruin Halloween. The loss of people's Halloween spirit ultimately ends up eradicating monsters from the other side, including Scary Godmother. In order to save them, Hannah keeps the spirit alive by thinking optimistically of every situation they're presented with, and eventually restores everything back to normal. Hannah brings over Jimmy's friends to the monster party, which is then again initially sabotaged by Jimmy until he makes amends with everyone there. Except not really, because nobody knew he was the reason for everything bad that happened. I get you would want to show kids that kindness beats evil, but you should probably show them that actions have consequences too. It's like that outdated Sonic Kid meme. This was my exact gripe with Scott Pilgrim Takes Over the World too. Scott was a literal PDF file who never really learned the severity of his actions, and Ramona hooked up with every single guy she wanted, again, ending things in her own terms. I know that was another huge side tangent, and if you haven't seen my Scott Pilgrim video yet, then that probably didn't make much sense to you. I'm just tired of these characters getting away with everything completely unscathed. Another example of this was also how Jimmy's friend group just pretended like they weren't in on quote-unquote pranking Hannah, so they would talk to Jimmy like he's the only demon who would do such a thing. But like, y'all were quite literally caught in 4K. Y'all were caught in a fucking movie. We all saw what happened. I think the only likable characters here are Hannah and all of the monsters, cause I could care less about that toxic friend group, bro. I feel like the first movie was way better than the second, and I'm not even sure if there was a need for a second one. Halloween Spooktacular actually had something to say, while Jimmy's Revenge focused too much on the entertainment value with nothing to show for it. That's probably also the reason as to why we haven't gotten another follow-up movie since 2005. And we probably never will. I couldn't find any data on how much money the second movie made in comparison to how much it cost to produce, but I'll take a wild guess and say not enough. Now that I've had some time to gather all of my thoughts, I don't even know how popular this movie even was. I asked multiple people about it and they all just looked at me like I just mentioned the most obscure piece of media to ever exist. I don't know. Have y'all seen it before? Let me know and subscribe on your way down. I'm trying to reach 1K, alright? I'm gonna go pass out later.